Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our IEEE-USA webinar, Defeating the Four Horsemen of the Mandated Return to Office, Employee Resistance, Attrition, Quiet Quitting, and DEI. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. Our presenter for today is Dr. Gleb Sapersky, CEO of the Future of Work Consultancy Disaster Avoidance Experts. Dr. Gleb has been lauded as the office whisperer and hybrid expert by the New York Times for helping leaders use hybrid work to improve retention and productivity while cutting costs. He wrote the first book on returning to the office and leading hybrid teams after the pandemic and has written 8 others, including a bestseller titled Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. His cutting-edge thought leadership was featured in over 650 articles in prominent venues such as Harvard Business Review, Fortune, and Fast Company. His expertise comes from over 20 years of consulting for Fortune 500 companies from Aflac to Xerox and over 15 years in academia as a behavioral scientist at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Ohio State University. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome, Dr. Gleb. We're very excited for what you have for our audience today.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Really appreciate you inviting me. Welcome, everyone. So, let's talk about defeating the four horsemen of the mandated return to office. What we'll talk about is how you address employee resistance, attrition, quiet quitting, and DI, and how you measure these phenomena. Now, you'll see that there's a resource link, tinyurl.com/DAE event under my name. And I know some people have been reporting some issues with accessing it, and Jonathan will send a Google Forms link that you can use to access my book, the one on which the presentation is based, which is called, Jonathan mentioned, Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. And this is free, not the book, this is free to you as part of the presentation. So Jonathan will send that link, that'll be useful for you. Okay, without further ado, let's talk about the four horsemen. Now, as you guessed already from the title, the four horsemen are resistance, attrition, quiet quitting, and loss of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are the four biggest problems I've seen when my clients are trying to figure out the return to office, and what that I've observed in other companies trying to figure out the return to office dynamics. I've helped over 27 companies now and government organizations and nonprofits, mainly companies, figure out the return to office, ranging from companies like Applied Materials and Entergy, so Fortune 500 companies, to mid-size, middle market companies with 100-ish people and less, and government agencies like the U.S. Census Bureau, the Department of Defense, nonprofits as well, like the Northwest Minnesota Foundation, to help them figure out how to do effective return to office in a way that doesn't derail employee engagement. Unfortunately, what I've typically seen is that companies don't have a good approach to addressing the four horsemen of the mandated return to office. And that's the phrase was actually, I heard it from one of my clients who brought me in because they're facing resistance, attrition, quiet quitting, and loss of DI. And she said it's like, she was the head of HR, CHRO, said it's like the four horsemen, the apocalypse, and said, can I use that phrase? And so I've been using that phrase from then on, which was in already, it was in late 2021. So quite a while ago that people were facing these issues. So let's talk about the first horseman, resistance. What does that mean? One example we could see is what happened to General Motors. So let's talk about what's happening with General Motors. It announced a back to office 3 days a week on Friday, and then received intense employee backlash. So really serious employee backlash. By Tuesday, the CEO rolled back all of the plans to come to the office. So this was really hurting the credibility of General Motors' plan to come to the office. And that was very serious, large-scale resistance. Now, this resistance, of course, undermines credibility. Let's put it in cautionary tale. with Apple. Now, Apple mandated 3 days a week of returning to the office. So that was the mandate. And it mandated this already relatively early in the return to office during the pandemic. And Apple employees are known to be compliant, loyal, as I'm sure you know. But Apple faced a lot of backlash from employees. So definitely a serious issue. Over 1,000 employees signed a petition asking for more flexibility. And so that was a huge issue for Apple. And we've seen that a number of other companies. Recently, H&R Block, I think that was about 3 weeks ago, H&R Block went back on its plan to return to office. And it said, we listened to our employees, we're not returning to the office because of a lot of resistance. Amazon is another company that had a lot of resistance, and they eventually did decide to go back to office, but they had something like 30,000 employees signing a petition complaining about it. So there's been open resistance. That's one form of resistance. Another form of resistance is non-compliance. So non-compliance can be a serious issue. Found companies that mandate a return to office have higher rates of non-compliance. I've seen that be up to 50% of employees who are not coming to the office the days that they're supposed to come. So they may be not coming at all, or maybe coming for a day or two when there's a requirement of 3 days a week. Some do what's called coffee badging. They come in for an hour or two just to show up, drink some coffee. Many managers, they don't discipline employees for non-compliance. And some tell me that they really feel like being non-compliant themselves, in fact. And there was a survey recently that came out showing that over 70% of managers are not disciplining workers for non-compliance. So what happens with non-compliance? Only 3% of companies report firing non-compliant employees. 30% have HR talk to them, and that's according to Gartner. So it's a major HR evaluation company. 42% of bosses say that they're simply ignoring these employees. 14% say that they issue verbal reprimands. 10% give negative performance reviews. 15% reduce pay. 12% threaten termination. And that's what a Stanford University survey found. And the difference between 3% from Gartner and the 12% from Stanford University is the difference between threatening termination and actually firing people. Now, what about my clients? So some of my clients just ignore non-compliant employees in non-managerial role, of course. Some do issue verbal reprimands, some reduce pay, but none issued negative performance reviews. It's not a performance issue, really, and none terminated employees. Okay, that's the first horseman. Let's go on to the second horseman, attrition. Apple, GM, Amazon, many others are facing serious attrition issues, including at the highest levels. So Apple's head of AI, which you can imagine how important that is, Ian Goodfellow, he quit his position because of a lack of flexibility. And that's what his email to his staff said, quote, I believe strongly that more flexibility would have been the best policy for my team, unquote. So the data backs this up. So spring 2022 study by Stanford University at trip.com, which is a major travel agency, it randomly assigned employees one half to a traditional schedule with no flexibility. So Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 in office. The other half took significant flexibility to work remotely part-time, so in the hybrid modality. Those who had significant flexibility had 35% better retention. 35%. That's huge. That's a major intervention. And after the trial, they changed all staff to have significant flexibility. So they knew what they were doing. Now, how many actually works best? So a study by Harvard Business School, a large company in Bangladesh, which randomly assigned staff to different schedules, one with less than 1 day in the office, another is 1 to 2 days, closer to 1 day, and then 3 to 5 days in office, closer to 3 days for most. Group B performed best. So that's really interesting. Kind of the closer to 1 day, maybe 2 days a week, they had the best work output, they had the greatest satisfaction, and the strongest social connection, which was surprising. I would have figured Group C would have had the strongest social connection, but I guess they had a lot of opportunities for socializing, so they weren't using them very effectively. So Group B, with 1 to 2 days, performed best. Now, SHRM research, Society for Human Resources, found that 48% of survey respondents will definitely look for a full-time work-from-home job in the next search. To take a full-time job with a 30-minute commute, 30 minutes one way and back, they needed a 20% pay raise. To work hybrid, half of their time in the office with a 30-minute commute, they would need a 10% pay raise. So pretty consistent. Now, how do you reduce attrition? The crucial tool here is empathy. Many traditional leaders, like Elon Musk, don't show empathy. They just say, well, come to the office. You're the elite laptop class if you don't come to the office. They believe it's a job requirement to come in. Simply demanding office presence is a great way to lose the most talented staff. In fact, there was a research come up recently comparing SpaceX to Microsoft and to Apple. And it found that SpaceX, which demanded 5 days in the office, lost 15% of its most senior staff compared to something like 5% at Apple because Apple had a less of a requirement. Now, companies that had smaller requirement didn't lose as much talented staff, their senior staff. So Apple lost 5% more staff than it should have in senior roles because they had a 3 day in office requirement. And SpaceX lost 15% more senior staff than they should have because of this requirement. Empathy means understanding the perspective of employees. So people work successfully during the pandemic most from home. So many see a requirement to come in several days a week as a heavy burden. It's essentially an unfunded mandate. They're forced to spend their money and their time on doing something that they perceive as useless. Disrupts their lives, costs them money, and exposes them to COVID because it's still around. People are still worried about it. People, especially people who have various autoimmune diseases, various immune compromises. So there's definitely still an issue for some people. Returning to the office clearly costs money and time. Average office costs, according to our labs, financially, working from home is 432 per month. That's utilities, office supplies, and so on. Commuting to work is nearly twice as much, 863 per month. That doesn't include relocation costs if you need to relocate. And some companies do require that you relocate, like Amazon. The time is also a large burden. So average daily commute is over an hour, much more in large urban areas. And so that's a lot of time. So show empathy in your communication. Don't ignore the elephant in the room. Acknowledge these pain points. Show that you recognize the cost of money and time. And share the story of your own challenges, speaking to how this disrupts your time, your money to come to the office, how it disrupts your life. So from a managerial perspective, if you need to manage people who are coming to the office. And you want to offer payments to ameliorate these challenges. Pay for people's commuting costs. That is the biggest pain point. Biggest pain point, that's what people are most upset about. So pay IRS mileage for driving, pay their parking costs, pay for public transit. Lunch costs is another issue. People don't like to spend a lot of money for lunch now that they have to come to the office, and they can spend much less if they work from home. So pay for the lunch costs. Local restaurants will cater lunch. Pay for the relocation. Of course, you should pay for the relocation for those who moved away from campus. And payments for childcare and elder care. So those are very valuable. Finally, salary increases can be a good strategy for key staff, at least to get over the hump of coming to the office. And address COVID fears. So again, people have some COVID fears. Most encourage all staff to get a bivalent booster shots, time to get off, time off to get off shots without forcing anything and so on. Just having this opportunity to get time off for having shots, and sick leave to recover from side effects. Okay, so those are the two fir- first of the two horsemen. So let's talk about the third one. Quiet quitting. You've heard this phrase. It's employees who are psychologically disengaged from their work. They do just enough to get by without getting into union trouble. Quiet quitting can be a lot worse than the much more obvious resistance or attrition because it's much harder to see. So you don't see who's quiet quitting, but really it does rot the company's culture from within. So this impact of the forced return to office does cause quiet quitting. So Gallup research shows that forcing employees to come to the office leads to disengagement, fear, and distrust. And those are all quiet quitting elements. So Ben Weigus, who is the Gallup Director of Research and Strategy for Workplace Management, said that, quote, employees experience significantly lower engagement, significantly lower well-being, significantly higher intent to leave, and significantly higher levels of burnout if they are forced to return to office. Quote, the optimal engagement boost occurs when employees spend 60 to 80% of their time, 3 to 4 days in a 5-day work week, working offsite, unquote. And again, if you remember that study of Harvard Business Review from Harvard Business School of the law company in Bangladesh, that was 1 to 2 days per week in the office, matching this same finding from Gallup research. A future forum report is that compared remote workers to full in-office workers found that remote workers are actually more likely to feel connected than those who are fully in the office, who are remote capable. They're more likely to feel directly connected, more fully connected to their direct manager and to their company's values. And they're equally likely to feel connected to their immediate teams. And so that is crucial. Why is that? Well, because if you're remote capable and you're forced to come in full time, then you will definitely feel disengaged and disconnected. That's people have really frustrating experience. So workers with full schedule flexibility compared to those with rigid schedules have 29% higher productivity, 50% greater ability to focus, and flexible remote work policies are cited as the number one factor in improving company culture over the last 2 years. So this is a huge benefit. We really see a lot of research showing the benefit of flexibility. A Cisco survey of 28,000 global employees found that 78% said that remote work improves their overall well-being. 79% said that it improved their work-life balance. 51% said that strengthened their friendships. 74% said it improved their family relationships. 82% cited that the ability to work from anywhere made them happier. And 55% said that ability to work from anywhere decreased their stress levels. So forced return to the office clearly, according to this evidence, harms well-being, leads to burnout, and contributes to quiet quitting. However uncomfortable it might be for leaders to acknowledge this, and if you're in a managerial position, it might be uncomfortable to acknowledge this, we very clearly see that there's harm to well-being, burnout, and leading to quiet quitting. So it's important to acknowledge this, have empathy, and address this using several tools. The single biggest source of frustration, coming into the office, doing the same thing you would do at home, is the worst. And you'll have worse meeting experience than hybrid meetings. So curate in-office experiences to address and avoid this problem. Remember, the only good reasons to come to the office, other than getting physical resources, is collaborating, socializing, and training. So those are the things that are best done in the office. Collaborating, socializing, and training. Those three things. Collaborating, socializing, and training. And training includes mentoring, training includes the people coming for more intense engagement in the office. For light training like you're doing right now, webinars are fine. For more intense training, it's better done in the office, And for more mentoring style training, it's better done in the office where you can immediately answer people's questions. So on the job training of sorts. So facilitate socializing and collaboration. After initial office return, you really want to create fun experiences for staff, like escape room events, other forms of team bonding, and train managers on how to lead hybrid teams effectively. We have a survey also from our labs showing that something like 70% of managers aren't trained for hybrid work. That's a big problem. So managers need to know how to use time at the office effectively on collaborative activities. And time at home should be focused on preparing for these activities and on individual tasks. Unfortunately, there was a survey from Stanford University from Nick Bloom, who is the most prominent researcher on home work from home. He found that when people go to the office, they only spend 80 more minutes per week on collaborative face-to-face activities. So that's only 80 more minutes. That's not good when you're coming to the office and during the week compared to a week when you work remotely, you only have 80 more minutes. That is a real waste of time for people commuting. It shows that managers are not structuring time in the office well when people are coming in. So that's a real problem. So invest in training. Demonstrate investment into professional development, especially for staff who were hired during the pandemic and who didn't come to the office previously. Make sure they're integrated, receive necessary on-the-job training and mentoring, and don't forget, of course, longer tenured staff. Prepare training events to meet the needs of both groups, and start with training on how to work effectively in hybrid settings, what to do at home, what to do in the office, and how to collaborate effectively, and how to have hybrid meetings. So invest into and technology improvement. Redesign offices to be much more collaborative spaces because that's what people will be doing in the office right now. Collaborative, or it should be. We see that there's a serious problem where people are coming to the office and only spending 80 more minutes in the office for face-to-face activities. That's not great per week. So staff will focus on their individual work at home. That's what you should be doing at home. Much better for more people to work on their individual tasks at home. Update your technology for hybrid meetings. Traditional technology used for hybrid meetings is a pretty terrible experience. Remote attendees are just going to be second-class citizens. On-site staff will dial in from the cubicles. It just does not work well. It negates all the benefits of coming to the office. People complain so much about coming to the office and doing Zoom calls all days. Not good. So that's the third horseman, quite quick. Let's talk about the fourth horseman, loss of diversity, equity, and inclusion. According to a Future Forum report, 21% of white knowledge workers want a full-time return to office experience, so Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. What about black knowledge workers? And again, these are all remote capable workers. So black knowledge workers, only 3% wanted to return to the office full-time. According to a SHRM study, 50% of all black office workers wanted to work from home permanently, compared to only 39% of those who are white. So we see again this big difference for black workers versus white workers. Why? Unfortunately, black professionals still suffer from some microaggressions and discrimination when they come to the office. They're less vulnerable to such problems when they're working remotely. And we have similar findings for other underrepresented groups who want to work more from home. According to the Conference Board survey, 78% of women say workplace flexibility is key to them. Only 61% of men say that by comparison. And the impact on people with disabilities is a specific thing I want to talk about in more depth, because that's a very clear, understandable dynamic with what's going on with diversity and inclusion. October 2022 study by Economic Innovation Group, which used US Census data, found that employment rates fell sharply during the pandemic for all workers. By Q2 2022, people without disabilities rose, so fell sharply, but rose most of the way back, 1.1% below pandemic levels. So that was about 2 years. It rose to 1.1% below pandemic levels. So it didn't fully recover, mostly recovered. So what happened with people with disabilities? It rose to 3.5% above pre-pandemic levels, above pre-pandemic levels. Huge benefit. And really, remote work is the explanatory factor. And this data that we're seeing aligns with statements by experts. So Thomas Foley, who is executive director of the National Disability Institute, said that workers with disabilities were asking for decades to work remotely. And they consistently heard companies saying no. During the pandemic, however, he said that we all realized that many of us could work remotely. That was disproportionately positive for people with disabilities. So, very clear benefit for people with disabilities. Another dynamic is that we need to think about is long COVID. There was a recent study from the Heritage Institute finding that long COVID cost the US economy and is anticipated to cost the US economy something like $6 trillion. 6 trillion, that's humongous. That is s- something like about 25% of GDP. It's huge. And of course, it's extended not over 1 year, but the whole cost of the pandemic for long COVID. That's a huge cost, 6 trillion. 90% of those who had COVID developed long COVID, meaning symptoms lasting for over 3 months after COVID, according to the CDC. 25% of those with long COVID had symptoms severe enough to change their employment status. So some of the symptoms for long COVID were things like anosmia, so an ability to smell, other things like this, that don't impact your ability to work effectively. But a quarter of those with long COVID did have change in their employment hours. So that it's interference with work for 4 million people. 4 million people, according to a recent study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And the pandemic, of course, increased the number of people with disabilities. So a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York showed that the number of disabled people in the US increased by 1.7 million people since the pandemic started. And of course, it's higher by now. We just don't have a study coming out more recently. Mainly due to long conditions like fatigue and brain fog. 800,000 dropped out of the labor force, but 900,000 people who are newly disabled, they were able to continue working in large part thanks to remote work. Now, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York study notes that long COVID would be considered a disability under the Americans for Disabilities Act, depending on the nature of the condition. Remote work is a legally reasonable accommodation for those struggling with fatigue and brain fog. So though that's something to really think about. Fatigue and brain fog, ADA, those are important issues to consider. Meta provides a good example for diversity and inclusion. Meta offered full-time remote work until 2023, and during that period of time, when it was offering remote work, it had a really positive impact in terms of its diversity, equity, and inclusion. According to its chief diversity officer, the candidates who accepted job offers for remote positions during the period of time it offered remote work were substantially more likely to come from diverse communities and less flexible companies. Meta set a goal of, in 2019, long before the pandemic started, of a 5-year diversity plan. And these 5-year diversity plans, companies that stretch goals, they don't usually achieve them. But it achieved its 5-year plan by 2022. So all of the benefits coming from hiring people who are underrepresented. It doubled Black and Hispanic workers in the US. It doubled the number of women in its global workforce, and people with disabilities increased from 4.7 to 6.2% of its employees. Now, how do you address the AI challenges? Let me talk about my clients. They improved ERG groups, so employee resource groups. Many organizations already have these ERG groups for women and people of color. You need to support them better. But you also want to establish ERG groups for others, like people with disabilities. Many companies don't have that, including those with long COVID. Need to establish ERG groups for parents because they face particular issues with return to office and offer ADA accommodations, including fully remote work for those with disabilities, which of course includes brain fatigue and brain fog. Now, you want to offer in-person mentoring for underrepresented groups. Lack of sponsorship and mentoring is a major challenge for people who are underrepresented. So it's important to provide two mentors for each mentee, one from the majority group, usually white males, one from underrepresented group. And so give networks of both kinds. So people have networks for the majority group and underrepresented groups, and the experiences of both mentors. In-person mentoring meetings are a great way to provide immediate value to underrepresented mentees and helps them appreciate return to office. So that's the fourth horseman. Let's talk about combining these four horsemen to measure success in return to the office. So there are going to be some traditional metrics when you want to measure the success of how you dealt with the four horsemen. One, of course, is retention. It's a huge metrics. Lots of companies are losing way more people than they wanted to lose because they are forcing people to come to the office and they are not addressing the attrition challenges that I mentioned earlier with the strategies that I described to address attrition challenges. Especially employees from underrepresented groups, they are losing out and going to more flexible companies like Atlassian, one of my clients, that is quite a bit more flexible. Microsoft is also quite flexible. It's the biggest company in the world. It's pretty flexible. NVIDIA, also the second biggest company in the world, is also pretty flexible compared to many other companies. Productivity is a big challenge for people with return to the office. There's a lot of productivity. Performance, so evaluating people's performance, another way of evaluating the success of your return to office, and sick days. How many sick days are people taking? Now, you also want to use surveys. So those are traditional metrics that are more objective to measure, but you want a survey customized to return to office to evaluate these dynamics, including demographic data. So what's happening with those underrepresented employees? You want to evaluate that. Establish a baseline before a return to office, if at all possible. If not, then not. With things like intent to stay should be one element of the survey. Another is people's happiness. How happy are they before they return to office, and then as the return to office unfolds? And again, if you already returned to office, you can just start with the current situation and see what kind of interventions you do, and then see what the survey results are as you rerun the survey. Engagement is another important element. People's well-being, so evaluate their well-being, and their sense of connection. So connection to supervisor, team members, and business unit members. And so you want to also think about the connection to company culture. Okay, then measuring return success and return to the office, repeat the survey. So repeat the survey 3 and 6 months after a return to office or after the initial running of the survey. Evaluate different business units. Have them run deliberate experiments. Different business units, different geographies, have them run experiments to see what works best for them and evaluate the results. Study the data based on your own internal experience and use your own data to change the return to office as needed and reevaluate the results. All right, before doing the key takeaways, I'm going to show you a video from the experience of someone who implemented these strategies in the return to office. This is Dr. Craig Knobloch. He is the executive director of the Information Sciences Institute at the University of Southern California. It's over 300 people on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, other information technology institute with people who are working there very desirable in the tech sector. So let's hear what Craig Knobloch has to say. Jonathan, can you please bring up the video?
Gleb Tsibursky came to my attention sometime back during the pandemic when I was planning to have our research institute follow the standard path that all the big corporations are following. So Apple and Google were announcing plans to have people come back 3 days a week. So I thought that seems like a good plan. So we actually sent out a message, said, okay, starting this date, everyone's coming back 3 days a week, and then can work from home 2 days a week. And then I saw a video that Gleb actually, a video talk that Gleb actually gave for IEEE that really actually changed my mind about this. And it was a video about hybrid work and how important it was to actually embrace it. And one of the things I was impressed in the video is that all these interesting ideas about how to make hybrid work more effective and stuff. So I signed up for a meeting with Gleb and learned quite a bit more about how to do hybrid work well. And so Gleb has come on as a consultant for the Information Science Institute and has been really helpful in terms of putting us much more in a leadership position in terms of figuring out how to do hybrid work. So we changed our policies. We are much more flexible about who can work at home and allowing people to work from home, whatever makes sense with respect to their supervisor, creating spaces in people's home offices, figuring out how to onboard people in a way that, when people haven't met in person, that is more effective. So I think he's been incredibly helpful in terms of really transitioning us to be sort of a lead in how we manage hybrid work at the Institute. So it's been incredibly useful with all of Gleb's advice, and I appreciate all the help he's given us with respect to moving forward with our hybrid work plans.
Okay, so I hope you found Craig Knockblock's experience helpful for you. Now, as a reminder, the 4 horsemen of the mandated return to office: resistance. To address resistance, you really want to be thinking about why are people resisting? Is there open resistance? Is there non-compliance? And the same techniques that will work for attrition will work for resistance as well. But you need to anticipate resistance. Again, many of my clients, in order to address resistance, they kind of honestly just ignore the people who are resistant, and it's not that big a deal. Usually the people who are resistant are people who are more experienced, and they are more willing to break the rules because they know that they can get away with it. And it's not worth it for managers to try to pursue people who are coming into the office like 1 day a week instead of 3 days a week. Attrition. For attrition, you really want to show people empathy with your expression as a manager, but also the company should show them empathy by paying for their commuting costs, by paying for lunch, by paying for elder care, and for the key staff, bumping up their salary. Quiet quitting. So we talked about quiet quitting. This is a serious issue. People are disengaged. And so you want to empathize with them, you want to show them you understand their challenges, and you want to take steps to address the quiet quitting. And also diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, you'll have underrepresented minorities be more likely to leave because of the return to office. And so to address that, you want to think about how to provide mentoring, how to provide ERG groups, and how to address this problem more broadly in general. And finally, measurements. So I talked about a number of measurements. So you want to measure at the start of the return to office, or if you already had that return to office, you want to measure now, and then introduce some of the interventions we talked about from the 4 horsemen, improve your plan, and then measure again. All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this talk on addressing the 4 horsemen of the mandated return to office. So for additional resources, if you are watching the webinar after the presentation, go to tinyurl.com/DAE event. tinyurl.com/DAE event. You'll get a link to my slides and a copy of my best-selling book, Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. So again, go to tinyurl.com/DAE event. And also, Jonathan will send a copy of the Google form that you can use to put in your information to get a copy of the book. Again, not selling the book, it's a free copy. So go in there, you'll get a copy of the book, you'll get a copy of the slides, and additional resources that will help you defeat the four horsemen of the mandated return to office. And at this stage, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Gleb. So folks, we are now at the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please post your questions in the comment section and we will load them onto the stream for Dr. Gleb to answer. We did receive some questions early in the webinar that might have been answered at a later point in the presentation, but we'll go ahead and answer them again for our viewers who tuned in later. Excuse me. Pardon me. Dr. Gleb, before we go on to our audience member questions, I did have a question of my own, a couple of questions of my own that I wanted to ask to get the conversation rolling. So my first question, how do you define, we've seen examples of both successful full in-office work week models, but we've also seen some uh, successful fully remote work models for organizations. So how would you define a successful hybrid work model for these days?
I'd use the measurements. So I talked about the measurements. You want to look at the goals like retention, performance, productivity, sick days, intent to stay, and so on. It doesn't really matter in a way which approach you use, fully remote, fully non hybrid. The outcomes are what matters. So what is your outcome in terms of retention? What is your outcome in terms of productivity? What is your outcome in terms of employee engagement, employee morale, innovation? All of these outcomes, you can measure them. And that's what you should use to evaluate your success.
Great, thank you. I'm sure it also heavily depends on the type of industry as well.
Not so much. Pretty much all industries can have some people who can work full-time remotely or part-time remotely. One of my clients, for example, is Applied Materials, which is a Fortune 200 high-tech manufacturing company in the semiconductor sector. And they, of course, have some workers who can't work remotely, but they have plenty of back office staff who can work remotely. And
Mhm.
you will find very few companies that don't have back office staff who can work remotely part or all of their time.
Right. Gotcha. Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to our audience member questions. Let me check it out. And folks, just to let you know, we have included the link to Dr. Gleb's book through the Google Forms below. We'll include it in the comment section as well so that you can copy and paste it as well. The other link that you can access is the tiny URL link on Dr. Gleb's screen. So, Dr. Gleb, our question from our audience member, Dewey asks, with all the documented advantages of remote work, would a company mandate a return to office?
I presume that's why they would.
Mhm.
Yes. So I think the main reason is that leaders, according to research from Pittsburgh University, they want to have a sense of control. They want to have a sense of control over their team members, over what's going on. They're used to working in an in-office remote work. So that in-office environment for them is something that's they're very comfortable with. And they've spent a lot of time in that environment. They've been successful for 30, 40 years, their career working in the office. And they want that back. They want to have control. They want to feel successful. They want to feel empowered. They're used to management by walking around. As the Outlab survey showed, only 30% of managers got training on how to do hybrid work effectively and remote work effectively, how to manage teams in those sorts of settings. So no wonder, kind of empathizing with the leaders, if you feel unsuccessful and out of control by having people work remotely, then you want to bring back people back to the office. Now, that's not great because the feeling of not being in control doesn't have anything to do with whether people are actually performing their
Mhm.
functions. Are they being productive? Are you able to retain them? Are they actually getting the stuff done? we see from a lot of research that working remotely, if organized effectively, is more productive, has better retention, has better morale, causes better innovation than if you work full time in the office, part time in the office, whatever. But many companies don't know how to organize these things effectively. And so that is the biggest challenge that I've seen. And then, like I said, I've helped 27 companies figure out their flexible work strategies. And that's the biggest challenge I see.
Gotcha. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Dewey. This next, it's not so much a question, but a statement from our audience member. Manager professionals typically have unstructured time given the natures of their roles.
Mhm.
So I want to bring up a question regarding that. That might be irrelevant. What are your opinions, or do you have any thoughts on organizations that do have managers that, aren't necessarily restricted by that return to office, but they do require their employees to be back in the office. Um,
I think, yeah, that's terrible. You're showing really poor leadership. If you are going to cause your employees to suffer through the commute, you should really be suffering through the commute yourself. And that
mm,
causes especially high disengagement and poor morale. And that is a big, big problem. I said already that most managers, they don't know how to organize hybrid work effectively, which most companies are clearly adopting a hybrid work modality where you come to the office something like 2 to 3 days a week. And again, right now, what we're seeing is that people are coming to the office, they're only spending 80 more minutes per week working face to face with meetings. That's not worthwhile. You're spending over a day commuting. It's 5 days, like the 3 days commuting, so that's over an hour for so over 3 hours for 80 minutes of FaceTime. Not worth it for the large majority of cases. So this is something that you really want to organize. If you want 80 more minutes of FaceTime, you can do 1 day a week that people come to the office for that 80 more minutes of FaceTime.
right. Thank you for that. And I understand that. There's much less data and on the effectiveness of hybrid and remote working, but I feel like what's already been kind of
Mhm.
examined so far is that there's an astounding amount of benefits to that kind of work model as opposed to the some would probably call it antiquated work model of fully in office. Um, this next question, audience member asks, the number one ingredient with any sustainable enterprise is profitability. Any insight on the impact of these documented advantages of remote working on longer term corporate profitability?
Absolutely. So we find that full-time remote work is the most profitable strategy because, for the obvious reason that you're not spending money on your office costs. And if you're doing full-time remote work, you want to spend some money on a quarterly get-together for your team members, but you're spending way less money than you would on office costs. And of course, you want to spend for people's equipment at home. But again, that's you will be spending on their equipment in the office anyway. So what you really want to do, if you want profitability, if your bottom line is your focus, no question, full-time remote work. Now, that's not necessarily the priority for all companies. Many companies already have their offices, so that's kind of a sunk cost on their pe- part, and they are not going to sell their offices. So for the companies that already have an office, full-time remote work may not be the most profitable strategy if you need to bring people together in the office. But if you're leasing your office, then full-time remote work is the most profitable strategy. Companies do benefit from bringing together people for socializing, collaboration, and training, as I mentioned. So that's something to think about. And I recommend for my clients that have their office and have their people living pretty close to each other to do something like maybe once a week, having people come to the office for socializing, collaboration, and training. Again, from the perspective of if you already have an office. but it's probably not worthwhile if you're leasing an office or if you need to lease an office, if you're focusing just on the bottom line.
Great, thank you. And thank you to our audience member for the question. This next question is probably more an answer for me. Uh, how can I get a professional development hour certificate for this presentation? So, first off, thank you to our audience members for tuning in. And if you would like to get some professional PDH certificates for this presentation, we'll be sending out a feedback survey after the live stream, after the webinar. Please fill that out. We would like to get your opinions on our webinars as well. And once you fill that out, you'll get more information on how to get those professional development hours. So thanks again for tuning in. Dr. Gleb, this next question: do companies believe that their employees are more productive at work despite the clear data? Is there a trust issue that might
Yes,
be at
so
play?
Microsoft research found what they call productivity paranoia, where 87% of managers have trouble believing that their workers are productive when they're working remotely. So trust issue is definitely an issue. And that's why it's very important to have clear measurements of productivity, of performance. Most companies, most managers are just used to managing by walking around. They don't have clear KPIs, key performance indicators, or OKRs, objectives and key results that are tied to the work of each individual team member. They're tied to the work of teams, so they might have KPIs and OKRs for a team, but not for individuals. And in order to have effective measurement of people's performance, you need to have KPIs or OKRs, not at the team level, but at the individual level, or broken down from the team level to individuals. If you do that, you can actually measure performance, and then you can see what people are doing. But again, most companies don't have that. Most managers are used to managing by walking around, and that's a major reason for that desire for control. So linking back to what my early comment was, there's a desire for control, desire to see people working, and lack of a training on how to effectively manage hybrid/remote teams, which includes KPIs and OKRs tied to individual performance.
Gotcha. Thank you for that insight. Our audience member did follow up with another question. Is the decrease in office space requirements with people working remotely provide benefits to the employer? So I guess there are plenty of offices or companies that reduce their office space or maybe even totally got rid of their office during the pandemic because of the remote work. Um, I guess what do you see any benefits, maybe any long-term benefits to that, as seen from research or data?
Absolutely. I mean, from the bottom line, so when you work in a hybrid manner, even if you have people come to the office, let's say for 3 days a week, most companies can get rid of something like 30% of their office space in that modality. And of course, if you have coming into the office less frequently, you can get rid of more office space and use more flexible space. If you want to bring people in for an on-site event, you don't have to have your own office to do that. You can just rent a WeWork space or co-working space of some other sorts.
Do you think, I mean, I guess this may depend on certain factors such as location, but do you think you would probably recommend still having a centralized office space just in case for whatever reason, or any thoughts on that?
So some companies need that office space for things like payroll. And I've definitely seen some of my clients retain their offices for things like this. Some companies want that office space for meeting with clients, impressing clients. So again, some of my clients retain an office space for that. So yes, there are certainly reasons to have office space, but it depends on whether it's worth it for you or not. And you want to look at the bottom line, the purposes of it, the goals, what's your purpose in having that. A number of my clients chose to get rid of all of their office space.
Gotcha. Thank you. And we're folks. We are approaching the end of the hour. We'll just a couple more question statements before we close it off. This next, I guess, statement from audience member John. I've heard that the productivity of remote work was the highest at the beginning of the pandemic, but that it faded non-trivially with time. Any thoughts or opinions on that statement?
Not what the research shows. So there was research from Stanford University showing that remote work was something like 5% more productive in May 2020. By May 2022, it increased to something like 9% more productive. And again, this is individual, this is not collaborative. So we're talking about individual performance, not team performance. There's more complexity around that. But individual performance raised from 5% to 9% because people learn to work together more effectively. They invested into their home offices. Companies invested into their tech and various backend software like Slack, Microsoft Teams. So people definitely improve their performance and productivity over time. And it's natural. Like you kind of understand where you learn how to do remote work more effectively over time. So no, it has not the case. So again, as we're wrapping up, I want to remind people to get the book. Go to tinyurl.com/DAE event. It's under my name. Again, tinyurl.com/DAE event for get a copy of my book and the slides, and also it will be in the Google Forms. So if you're watching this after the webinar, make sure to use that link tinyurl.com/Google Forms. I'm sorry, /DAE event. Otherwise, you can use the Google Forms.
And folks, we have included the link at the bottom and also in the comment section as well. And so, Dr. Gleb, this final question from our audience member: any insight on how to mitigate strain between electrical engineers that must come in, for example, at a manufacturing environment versus electrical engineers with remote work viability?
The best way to do so is to set up social events. There are two elements here. So what you want to do, and I've done this, let's say at Applied Materials. So you want to make sure to set up social events where these people can mix together and they can form that bonds of trust. So having that collaboration, regular social events that can help people bond. That's one element of things, to humanize each other and have that more collaboration. The second is to make sure to pay for the commuting costs and lunch costs and elder care and child care costs of those who are coming to the office so that they don't feel that they are wasting their time and money and they are essentially getting a pay cut compared to those who have remote work viability. So essentially equalize their salaries through paying for the costs that are being incurred by folks who are coming into the office more frequently.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, from personal experience, living in the DC metro area, it can get kind of pricey when it comes to commuting. So totally would appreciate any sort of commuting benefits, and I'm sure every other company employee would. But all right, everyone. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Gleb, for joining us today and giving your expert insights on the challenges that people face in regards to the mandated office returns and what companies can do to address it.
And thank you
Really
for
great
inviting
having
me.
you join us today. And thank you to our audience for tuning in as well and for your great questions. Before we end things off today, I do have a couple announcements. First, the IEEE-USA Nominations and Appointments Committee has extended the nomination deadline for IEEE-USA's Board of Directors. We're seeking your help identifying U.S. IEEE members who may be interested in and well qualified for service in these positions, including the 2026 IEEE-USA President-elect. Self-nominations are allowed, and the portal will accept nominations through August 26th. Our second announcement, due to popular demand, and in case you have missed it, we've created a booking inquiry for those who would still like to join IEEE USA on our Alaska cruise. Um, Pardon me, one second. And if you missed our room block deadline and would like to join in on the festivities, please fill out the form on our website at cruise.ieeeusa.org. A member of our reservations team will respond to you within 2 to 3 business days. IEEE-USA webinars are designed to help you find your next job, maintain your career, understand ethical considerations in the workplace, and learn about other career building strategies and public policy developments that affect your profession. If you like the content presented in today's webinar, be sure to check out our other ones. We have an entire catalog of presentations available for your viewing pleasure on our website. And finally, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels and check back daily on our social media for future live stream updates. Have a great day, everyone.